Welcome to Darkhourparanormallive. I am your host, Mike Roser. Tonight, folks, we're getting into the thick and thin of things here. I'm going to tell you something funny in just a moment, but before I do that, I want to let you know that I have Dr. Jonathan Reed back on this evening, of course, coming back and returning from the last show that we did with Dr. J Radio Live about a month ago, where we covered at the very core the foundation of this absolutely incredible case that Dr. Reed has been involved in since 1996. And this is serious now because, again, this is a legendary case that is still, in all senses of the expression, ongoing. For those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Reed's case, I implore you to go and check out the other interview that we had provided. I will put links down into the description below and check that out after the show. But definitely check out that show first. It really covers, again, the foundation of what we're going to get into and expound upon this evening. It's absolutely fantastic. And, you know, I can't recommend it more. The funny thing is, Jonathan's story has never changed. And in addition, you'll only find details that have a progressive note to them in addition to what's already there. So nothing at the foundation has ever changed. This happened back in 1996 when Dr. Jonathan Reed had an encounter with an extraterrestrial in Washington State. I will have him reiterate a little bit here, and I got to tell you, I'm a little off kilter at the moment because I pressed the button to go live, and it started to go live, and then it stopped somewhere. But the odd thing is, when that happens, you have to recycle the show. But I didn't have to. So I don't know what happened. We're going to get into a lot of things tonight that build upon what we've already spoken about. And, you know, again, that's why it's imperative for, you know, most of you to go back and watch that other interview we did. And of course, please go and check out Dr. J Radio Live's interview. He did 2 of them that I'm aware of with Dr. Reed. And those links are already in the description. You can check those out as well. Again, this is a case that will not die. And it's not that people haven't tried to bury it. It has too much to it. You want to talk about anecdotal evidence? That's fantastic. We have that all across the board through ufology, through the paranormal, through cryptozoology. Every part of the field, every aspect has the anecdotal. But Dr. Jonathan Reed's case is much different because he actually has physical evidence. And I'm talking evidence that compounds upon itself. So that's absolutely different than what we've already understood when we come up against something like this in terms of analysis and critical thinking. Now, myself being a skeptic to a certain degree, I always want to entertain the scientific backing because in my mind, a lot of that will corroborate with the esoteric end of things. And there are many braids that go into Dr. Reed's story that were frayed at one point and eventually have become part of that rope. And as it does, there's a stability about this story that is unmatched in any other case in ufology. So, without further ado, I won't keep you waiting. I'd really like to bring Dr. Reed on, and I'll have him, again, give a little reiteration for those of you who are not familiar with the story or only have limited details. Again, please go back into some of these other interviews. A lot is contained within those that will answer some of the questions you may have based on the questions we'll be addressing this evening, which, again, build upon what has already been expressed. Folks, I'd like to introduce to you and have you revisit a good friend of mine and yours, Dr. Jonathan Reed. Dr. Reed, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hi, Michael.
Round 2,
buddy.
I
want to say thank you so much for having me, and I want to say thank you to your audience. I appreciate their time and their patience in listening to something that is very unusual but very close to my heart. It's been 28 years and going for me. So if I can just quickly give you a recap of what actually happened. I was a medical doctor, developmental psychiatric, child development, worked for about 13 years in the field, University of Washington Medical Center. I graduated from San Diego State University, UCLA University, and the University of Washington. On a beautiful October day, 15th, which was a Tuesday, I believe, I went for a hike with my dog, Susie, 7-year-old golden retriever. We got in my Jeep, drove about 50 minutes away from Seattle, which is where I live, into the Cascade Mountains. Beautiful, pristine wilderness, lots of old logging trails and logging roads that you could traverse for hours, where your dog could run off the leash and have a great time chasing raccoons and squirrels and whatever. But this is exactly what we did. We'd been in this place many, many times before, so nothing out of the ordinary to begin with. Parked my Jeep, we got out, walked for about an hour, and all of a sudden she started running and barking, and again, nothing unusual. But this time, the barking changed, the sound of her voice. If you've ever owned a dog, you realize that you become very familiar with their personality and their voice. And her barking changed to more of a fearful, fierce sound rather than just exploring. And I was a little concerned, so I set my backpack down. I couldn't see her because of the dense underbrush of the area, but I knew she was close. I could hear that she was very close, so I picked up a large uh, baseball bat sized branch that happened to lay along the trail, just in case I had to untangle her, in case it was a wildcat or a small bear, because we have those kind of critters in the area. So I tried to vector the sound where she was, still not seeing her, and ran up the path and crashed through the underbrush and came face to face with her and this creature. I was 4 feet away, seeing this little dark creature because of the underbrush vibrating and throwing her back and forth over his head. And my dog weighed, a good 80 pounds, which none of this made sense. But within seconds, he started to tear her body apart, killing her in front of me, tearing her head right across her back. And an insane situation to witness. I went into what I can only imagine was unconscious rage, taking this branch, hitting it as hard as I could, trying to stop this action. It fell back on the ground. My dog was dead and had fallen to the ground in what was like ashes out of your fireplace. And I fell to the ground sick, crippling sickness. I mean, no control of my bowel or bladder or any of my muscles. I mean, instantaneously, when the branch hit the skull of this creature, I fell to the ground the same way. And this was the initial contact. This is how it took place. And from then on, it was a matter of survival, me surviving this moment, trying to regain some composure, trying to calm down my breathing, trying to get some ability to get out of the forest. Because at this time it was, in the afternoon and it was going to be getting dark, and I didn't know if I could get back to my car. I thought I was going to die because of this sickness that I was feeling. So this was the initial contact. And from then on, it was, like I said, it was a matter of survival. It was trying to see if I could stand and I would fall down. And then I realized I had my water in my pack. So I crawled back to where my pack was, where I had set it down, took out some cameras to get to the water, drank the water, and then realized, okay, I have my camera. Okay, I could try to take a picture of what was going on in this whole area, because it was so unreal. It was so unbelievable. I figured I was just going into shock and that maybe I was imagining all of this. So, if nothing else, I took my camera to find some solace in knowing how to function the camera. I could realize that. I could understand that process. So I took pictures of everything, even imagining that maybe nothing would come out. and that would prove to myself that I was imagining all of this. So that was my process. I had a small video camera, one of the first ones ever made, that was very, very compact. I took some video of the site, of the being, of the creature, which I had no idea what it was. Look, I wasn't into any of this. I wasn't a believer. I was a scientist. I was a medical doctor. And to me, this was not in my paradigm at all. And it just, none of this made sense. Everything was out of context for my life, for what I believed in. So I just tried to continue to exist. I didn't know if I was having a stroke or a heart attack or what all was going on with my physiology, but I knew it was so out of sorts that I had to pay attention, because otherwise I may not survive this moment. So, Michael, that's where it all began.
I mean, that's the initial contact, and I mean, it's no less intriguing than any of the rest of what comes after. But for the sake of clarity, out of curiosity, how many times did you hit this being? Was it just a
Once,
one? Just once?
once, just like
Um,
a swing of a baseball bat, and I hit it as hard as I could, and it broke its skull. It breached its skull, uh, breaking the bone and the cranial sac, which released the cranial fluid and blood and tissue
mhm.
out of the back of its head. So in that instance, it fell to the ground. There was no breathing. There was no movement. It was dead for as far as I was concerned. And look, people say, oh, you were, heroic for doing this. I was not a hero. I was afraid. I was scared for my life, not only because what I saw it do to my dog, but what it could do to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that instant, like I said, my body had been so overwhelmed in the sickness, I couldn't I couldn't function. I couldn't even sit up for probably 15 minutes. I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. It was like I couldn't get any air in my lungs, and my heart was just pumping so hard. I was afraid that I was going to have a heart attack
Mm-hmm.
and die. And and that lasted for over an hour before I even could drink the water and calm down a little bit to gather my wits about me, which was very difficult. Um, I had no concept of what was going on, and I really didn't want to think about it. It was scary. It was tremendously uh, unnatural to my life. I didn't know what this thing could be. I didn't know. It was childlike inside. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought, have I killed a child? Is this some child that has a mask on? And I took time while I was very close to it to make sure that it wasn't a child with a mask on. And that didn't really give me any solace, because now, again, what am I looking at? What am I dealing with? What have I killed? Am I going to be arrested? Am I going to be put in prison for something? Uh, am I even going to get out of this place?
Mm-hmm.
That was my concern. And so, to make a long story short, I gathered my wits about me slowly. I saw that there was something else in the area. I could hear this vibrating, low harmonic tone that almost rattled my backbone. And
Mm.
I couldn't imagine what that was. I hoped it was another hiker or another camper in the area. Maybe I could get help, because I needed help. And so I would stand up and lean against a tree, and then I'd fall back down, and I'd crawl around the ground, around the path, and see if I could see anyone. But there was no one. But I saw through the brush, through the trees, what looked like a mirage. of the trees moving a little bit with something behind it, some black shape that I couldn't make out clearly. So I crawled farther and I would stand up and fall down and I kept going. And I finally found this black, what I call the obelisk, which was a six-sided black diamond shape laying on its side uh, object, which was about 10 to 12 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, and 2.5 feet high. And it was 3 feet off the ground. It was not touching the ground. It had no wheels, no landing gear, no windows, no seams. It was like a black floating piece of marble, black marble. And and again, totally out of place in the middle of the forest. This didn't exist in my mind. There's no way this could be there. And I touched it and I burned the inside of my hand because it was cold like dry ice. And I pushed on it, and I weigh almost 200 pounds, and it wouldn't move, not a fraction of an inch. So it wasn't floating, it was literally anchored in the air, in a space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many people have said, oh, well, it was a ship or it was this. And well, first of all, I never called it a ship because I never felt that. It wasn't big enough as far as what I thought. Now, could this small being fit inside of it dimensionally? Yes, it could. It could actually squeeze in there. But I don't think it was what people assume a spaceship would be like. I think it was something else. I think it was a doorway or a portal. Because when I touched it and fell against it for a brief second, I felt like I was inside an airplane hangar, a black, dark airplane hangar where I could see little lights way off in the distance, like a mile away. And then a second later, I was outside laying on the ground. Now, did I imagine this? It's possible. But I clearly remember it. Why would I imagine that? I had no way of thinking about an airplane hangar in that moment. So do I think it absorbed me for a second? Yes, I do. I think it was looking for the little creature. I think this object that I call the obelisk had intelligence and was looking for his partner, his breathing, living partner. And the only thing that was breathing and walking around now was me. So maybe it was trying to figure out if I was him. And I can't confirm that. I don't have any proof of that, but that's what it felt like at the moment. And it was surreal. It was unusual. Again, I took pictures of everything. And these are the very, very clear pictures that I have of this obelisk, this thing, which never moved except to make this tone, this harmonic tone, which once I touched it, it changed to more of a pleasant tone. But that's all it ever did. And when I left this area, when I actually was able to start to walk back toward where I had parked my Jeep, which was almost 3 hours later, it was still there. It didn't move. It never left. And a day later, I came back with a friend who was determined to find this thing and tow it out of there on a trailer. It wasn't there. There was nothing there. In fact, some of the plants, the ferns that I had actually torn out of the ground with my bare hands, seemed to be replanted, almost like nothing had ever happened, like time had been reversed in this place.
Well, I mean, in many cases, before you go on, when somebody comes up against something like this, and of course, the enormity of what you experience is a bit more rare. than not. But our intuition kicks in. And when you come into contact with something, to the level that you're discussing, I think at that point, when we're talking about vibration, we're talking about harmonics, we're perhaps talking about how an entirely different species operates and interprets reality and yet still meshes with ours. The intuition that we have is worth a whole lot more than I think people give it. And, within that moment that you felt that you got pulled into this object, and you came back with the experience and this remembrance, and you sit and you say, well, maybe it was imagination, maybe it wasn't. There's a very good chance, outside of everything else that you can discuss, that it was not some sort of figment. And again, we see this in the paranormal world. We see this in different people that have traveled to vortexes that are known. There's missing time, there's time that stops. This isn't imagined. This is a different perception that we all encompass, folks, that, will certainly emerge, if not sooner, at the time of the traumatic event that we're experiencing. So I wanted to interject that.
No, I appreciate that. And I can't say enough how much I appreciate people's valuable input to ideas and things that have come across. I mean, in 28 years, I've been around the world 3 times talking about this incident with thousands of people who have given me great insight to probably what occurred and why. I don't want to come across for people thinking that I am so knowledgeable of this, because I'm not. I was not into ufology or aliens or anything to do with it. It was the farthest thing from my mind. So seeing this out in the middle of the forest, where the strangest thing that I expected to see was a bear or a deer, which we'd seen earlier in the day, but to come across this, to come across what happened with my dog in just seconds, and then reacting to that, and then the terrible trauma that was ensued afterwards, was almost too much to fathom. And I just don't want people to think, oh, well, he could have done this, or he was aware that this was going on. Look, I wasn't aware of anything other than my trauma of my body, and that I was so sick, and none of it made any sense, none of it. So the long story short, I decided I wanted to cover the body, because I thought, well, I'll bring somebody back who can help me, and maybe we can, take this to the authorities and figure out what had happened, because I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what was going on. So in my pack, I had a thermal blanket. I didn't have any tools. I had a pocket knife. I had some dog food, some water. But this thermal blanket was something that could be spread out and opened up. And it's what you put around yourself if you're stuck in the woods overnight or in cold situations, to keep your body temperature warm, to keep.
And that's why we see, what you're going to discuss in just a moment on the video, wrapped in this particular material. I just want to make that clear for folks, because that has been a question.
It's a silvery, kind of a silvery gold mylar material that has surprisingly a strong tensile strength to it. So I put this, my initial idea was to put it over the body, cover the edges of this thermal blanket with rocks or branches to keep animals away from it until we could come back and get it. Well, there weren't any rocks. This was up high on the edge of the tree line in the mountains. There really weren't any loose stones available. And branch-wise, there were very few. So I decided I would kind of put this thermal blanket underneath the body, because I really didn't want to touch it. I just kind of pushed it under the body. And in doing so, I realized this is so light. It has no weight to it. It was like 40 or 50 pounds at the very most, but 4.5 feet tall. I mean, that's Again, didn't make any sense, but of course nothing did at this point. But I pushed it under the body, and then I rolled it up like a sleeping bag, like you would roll up a sleeping bag with the body inside. And at that moment, I thought, well, I could pick it up and move it maybe to a different place on the path on the logging road that I had come down, and find a place more secure to store it. Maybe there would be some branches that I could put on top of it. So in doing so, I took my straps of my pack off of my pack and I put it around this long, some people say it looked like a burrito, in two places so that I could pull it together and put it and lift it. And that worked. And I was able to pick it up and pick up my pack and start slowly to walk from where we had come, where I had parked my Jeep. And I had no idea how I could get back there because it had been an hour at least to this point from my Jeep. But all of a sudden, I was instantly back at my Jeep. Now, I don't know if I was unconscious and just walking, but it was like there was no time that had passed.
Mm-hmm.
And standing at the back of my Jeep, I simply opened the back door, lifted this body in, and it was covered. I didn't see it, I couldn't see it. Put it in there, closed the door, and then sat in the passenger seat for quite a while, thinking, what had happened? What is going on? What's the reality? And I looked over at the passenger seat where my dog always sat, and she wasn't there. Where she always sat, and I knew something had happened. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and I could see the top of the thermal blanket. So I continued to try to calm down. I started the Jeep. I started to drive where I wanted to go home. I wanted to be back in reality. And I thought, well, I'll go to the ranger station. That's close. That's about 5 miles away. And I'd stop, I'd get out, I'd throw up, I'd get back in the Jeep, and I'd start driving again. And I got to the ranger station, and there was no one there. I don't know where they were, but they were gone, and the building was locked. So I got back in, and I just drove home. Mm-hmm. Again, stopping along the way to get sick and getting back in.
Do you think that, after so many years of contemplation and reflection, that sickness was either a defense mechanism, sort of as a last resort for that creature, or do you think that there was something else in play in respect to how ill you became?
Well, after talking to lots of people around the world who have also seen this black craft, like I saw, what I call the obelisk, they 100% believe that this was a defense mechanism, probably instigated by that mechanism, trying to protect the creature. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned now is the creature was wearing a black suit. From its neck to its feet was all one piece, no seams, no zippers, no holes, tight, including gloves that completely covered its hands and its feet. This suit, I witnessed part of it coming off and forcing it over the head of my dog. Like it, part of the suit itself became another appendage and was what was grasping the head of my dog and tearing it apart. So all of this was some kind of a defense mechanism, I'm sure. And in regard to your question, it instantly happened when I connected the branch to its skull. So do I think it was reacting to the circumstance? Yes, I do. I think it was trying to stop me from further injuring this entity, and that absolutely it was a defensive mechanism. And it worked. It was absolutely perfect because it did stop me for almost 3 hours, to the point where if I hadn't have really contemplated managing my breathing and my time, I may not have survived it. So again, back to the timeline, I drove home. I parked in my carport. I sat there for a few minutes. I went in the house. I drank some water. I lived alone. I came back out, and I decided I can't leave this in my car. Somebody might steal it. Somebody might, my mind was reeling.
Of course.
And I thought, well, that'd be a surprise if they went to steal this. But I figured, okay, where can I put it? Should I dig a hole? Should I, cover it up? What should I do? And in my garage, right next to my carport, the standalone garage, I had a freezer, a big, older, coffin-style freezer. And I thought, well, if I put it in there, it'll preserve it. It won't, and it smelled terrible. It had a terrible, pungent odor. And I thought, well, I don't want to, I just want to preserve it, and I want to get it out of sight. So I took out the basket, one little basket that was in the freezer, put it on the ground, opened the freezer, took the basket out, and lowered this thermal blanket into the freezer. And then closed the top of the lid of the freezer, which really didn't lock properly, but it latched. It, was. And then I went in the house. I went in my house and I stood in my shower with all my clothes on for I don't know how long, until I could at least clean up, because I was a mess. I was just an absolute mess. And got out, drank more water, decided, what do I do? And so I called my girlfriend. She wasn't home. I left her a message. Called another guy who I worked with. He wasn't in. This was the days of the old answering machines. And so I'd leave a message, just call me, please call me. And I called another guy that I grew up with that lived, a couple miles away from where I lived. And I said, Gary, you got to call me. I'm sick. Susie is dead. I need you. I need help, please. And left that message. And within 15 minutes, he called me back. He talked to me, tried to calm me down, said he'd come over. He came over. He knew that I was practically out of my mind when he got there. Tried to calm me down, but said, you're sick, Jonathan. I'm sure we can, get you better. We can deal with all. And I was angry because I knew he didn't believe anything I was saying. And I said, you've got to believe me. I have evidence. I have proof that this happened. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, it's in the garage. It's in my freezer. And he said, Susie's in your freezer? And I said, no, not Susie. And I had already gone back out and checked to see if it was Susie. And I knew it wasn't. So I took him to the garage, opened the freezer, set it on the floor, and it wasn't Susie. It was this creature. And it had a hole in its head that was that big, with the skull flap that flapped back and forth. I mean, it was exactly like the photographs portray it. He was beside himself, unbelievably, couldn't believe what he was looking at. We both kind of screamed at each other, just a couple of words, and I put it back in the freezer, and we went back in the house and just sat there for a long time without really saying anything. And I just kept saying, I'm so sick. I've got to calm down. I've got to, you know, and he started to say, Jonathan, I know what this is. And I said, no, we don't know what this is. We don't know anything. And he said, oh no, this is an alien. And I said, no, it's not. I don't want to put a name or a face or an idea to this because we don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sure. He was absolutely, sure of what it was because he had seen programs about this kind of thing. He had read books on this. He was an architect by occupation and a very learned person, not someone jumping to conclusions, but he was absolutely sure he knew what this was. And I said, "Well, we got to call the police." He said, "No, we don't need to. We don't want to call the police." He
Mm.
said, "There's other people, you know, that we can call that will deal with this properly." And so that's the process we started to go down.
Well, out of curiosity, I mean, in your recollection, you mentioned that there were at least several people that had come to your house during that time that you had this body for about 8 days.
There were at that time during 10 days.
Okay.
At that time, there were approximately 10 or 11 people who had witnessed the body with their own eyes, standing over it as I took it out of the freezer, as I removed it, the thermal blanket, who had witnessed it.
Have any of those people come around and corroborated your story in a
Oh,
public
yes.
fashion at any point?
Yes.
Okay, I was curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only physically in videotape, but also testimony in transcription that they've verified and authenticated. This continued to be a situation that I had no scope of what it was, how to deal with it, or what would happen. I thought this would be a situation where once I showed it to some of the other doctors, the other professors that I worked with, that I would be able to give them the body. They would take it away. They could do pathology on it. They could give it to the authorities. That was my plan
Mm-hmm.
because I basically wanted it out of my possession. And so in that next day, Gary said, well, we need to call some of these people. And I said, well, who? And he said, well, we can start with the Air Force and ask them, if you found this in the woods, what do you do with it? What's the process?
What's the protocol? Yeah.
Right. And most of the time they would hang up or say, you're crazy, don't waste our time. And they didn't want to talk to us. But Gary got a hold of some people from some group called MUFON,
Mm-hmm.
and they seemed to be really interested. They were very excited. Pardon?
I said, I wonder why.
Yeah, and they seem to have appropriate ways of dealing with it and saying, well, don't call anybody else. We'll meet you in a public place. We need to talk about this. And a few days had gone by. I had had the film processed at a local independent, developing outfit that was a few miles away. And so I had copies made of all these prints just because I did. And I had approximately 4 rolls of film that was processed. Some of it was very good, very clear. Some of it was very dark and not so good. But nevertheless, I had the photographs. And I had a videotape, which I had showed Gary in my living room, which he, jaw fell open and unbelievably. And I actually had brought the body into my rec room, opened the thermal blanket, videotaped the entire process of just an examination a cursory examination of the body. I turned the head, I opened the mouth, I opened the eyes. You could see the wound, you could see the blood. Uh, it's clear what you're looking at as far as the reality of it. And Gary had
Whatever.
seen that, and I had made copies of that. So, in meeting with these people who were very excited to meet with me, I showed them the still photographs, and they were, you know, very impressed, very excited, and said they would help me. And I had negatives of all this. This was 35 millimeter film, Kodachrome, Kodacolor, Ektachrome, um, both slide and negative film.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, well, can we have some of these and take them with us? We would like to make arrangements for you, and then we'll help you deal with whatever else is going on. Now, I didn't tell them that I had the body. I did not tell them that I physically still had the body in my
Okay.
house. I just decided that wasn't a good idea. And consequently, they gave me a phone number and said, we'll be in touch with you in the next day or so. And they never called me. And I called that number, and that number was disconnected. It didn't exist. Those people never brought my evidence back, nor did I ever see them again. Later,
Well,
I found out that they were not the group that they said they were representing, this MUFON, and that somehow they had got information about what I had been through and what I had, and
mm-hmm.
probably through the phone calls that we were making, somebody had either trapped my phone, tapped it, or they had made some kind of analogy to us to understand that there was more going on than what I was telling. Nevertheless, we heard clicks on my phones. We heard what we were run off the road by several different cars. People were following us. People had broken into my parents' house and ransacked it, really not taking anything. They later broke into my house and destroyed my house. They took everything out of my house. I drove by, saw 3 vans sitting in my yard. I didn't stop. I drove to a friend of mine's house, called the police, reported it, sat there for hours, and then went back. And when I went back, there was nobody there. They had destroyed everything in my house. They had put holes in the floor and the walls and the ceiling. They had tore the toilet off the floor and left it
Jesus.
sitting aside. There was water spraying everywhere. And I went to the garage, and this was on the 9th day from the day I had brought it home. And I know I haven't told you something yet, but I just wanted to show you that everything was gone. They had taken everything, including the freezer, out of my garage.
Mm-hmm.
They had pried the door out of the wall of the garage. They didn't open it. They just pried the whole door frame out of the wall of the garage. And probably because they couldn't get the freezer out because it was too wide, it was wider than the doorway. Nevertheless, it was gone. But I'm going to back up here now and tell you that on the 3rd day, when I had been showing the body to my constituents, my partners in crime, people I worked with in the hospital, taking the body out of the freezer, laying it on the table, and with a big light, and opening it and showing them what it was, and opening its mouth and moving it. And like I said, a lot of people had witnessed this. On the 3rd day, the guy that was supposed to come over called me and said, Jonathan, I'm not coming. I'm not coming. And this was somebody I knew really, really well. And I said, what do you mean you're not coming? He says, I'm not going to talk to you anymore about this. I'm just not coming, and I don't think you should do anything more with this. and hung up. And I was furious. I was angry. This is somebody who I saw practically every day during my work for years, somebody I trusted. So I had set out the table in my garage with this big light so that I, could lay the body out. So I went out to the garage to put that away and take the table down, and I heard a sound in my garage. It sounded like a rubbing or a scratching sound, and I thought it was coming from the underneath the freezer, and I thought, okay, it's the compressor, because this is an older freezer, and I thought, well, maybe the compressor is going out, and it's making this sound, and if the compressor's going out, then I'm going to be in trouble because I'm going to have to clear out my refrigerator to put this thing in.
Mm-hmm.
So I opened the lid to check the thermometer that's on the inside of the lid of the freezer. And if it was temperature was going out, then I knew what was happening. So I did that, opened the lid, and instead of anything else happening, this creature that was inside my freezer sat up out of the end of the thermal blanket and started screaming at me with such violence and such intensity that it literally pushed me back across the garage. And it was alive and screaming at me and probably going to kill me next, is what went through my mind.
Sure.
And I dropped the lid of the freezer. I ran out of there. I left the door open. I went in the house, slammed the door, and was going out of my mind in fear, because I figured now this creature that I tried to kill is going to come and kill me. And I went to the phone. I called Gary, my friend. I said, "You got to come over. We got a bigger problem." And I didn't even say what it was. And he came over and he tried to calm me down. He said, "Johnson, this is impossible. It can't be happening. We've been taking this body in and out of the freezer. We've been examining it. We've been opening the wound on its head. We know that this isn't I said, "Come to the garage with me." And that's all I said. I said, "You just come to the garage." And I took him out there and I said, "Open the freezer. Just open the lid of the freezer." He did it. It sat up, started screaming at both of us. We both ran into the house and just looked at each other.
So wait, there were many instances, or there were several instances, I should say, that this creature made noise, which may lend to the ability that you had at some point to capture this on an audio clip that you then shared with Coast to Coast AM. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was able to actually record, and it was initially, I want to explain this, which I seldom do. It was initially recorded on my video camera.
Mm-hmm.
And the scream is so intense that there was no video. There was only audio recorded on that. And later we found out that, and we had been videotaping the body for 3 days until this point where it reanimated. Clear video, absolutely everything worked perfect. But once it was awake, there was no way to videotape it. It would not, the video camera would not process it. The only thing it would do is record the audio. And that's something we found.
I mean, there are a lot of explanations we can go into that, none of them conventional, of course. But I will tell you that within the time that you released that audio clip, on Coast to Coast, I've obviously had that in my hand several times. There was one instance where I was able to the best of my ability with the quality, spectrally analyze that sound. Now, I'm a studio engineer by trade, and sound is my forte. and I've kind of used this in different ways to determine, for example, what sounds like a Sasquatch out in the woods. You can actually measure within certain reason what the size of that chest cavity might be, which gives you an indication of the actual size of that animal in its entirety. Through your audio clip, one of the most pressing things that I found was that, the human vocal range goes from, in its apex, between 1,000 hertz all the way up to about 4,500 hertz, and that's where we sit within that frame. This actually sat higher up on the spectrum, and there was indication that there were frequencies that were not able to be recorded above 20,000 kilohertz that were going to be present within a different type of analysis that might be able to see that in a digital sense. Now, I didn't have the ability to go deeper than that, but what I can sit here and say definitively is that what was in that clip, whatever was making that sound, was absolutely not human, and it was not an animal that we are familiar with. I just wanted to put that out there.
During the process, over the years, I've had the ability to take my story around the world and have different people analyze it and look at it, not destructively, but to basically give us some idea of really what we're dealing with here. And some audio engineers in Osaka, Japan, from the University of Osaka, did a study, and also some people from Tokyo did a study on this sound. And they found that not only everything that you have said is true, but also the fact that it is a biological created sound. It's not a machine. It's not a synthesized sound. It's absolutely coming from the lungs and the vocal ability of some type of biological entity. You mentioning that the curvature of the actual frequencies, they found that it was so far above the audible range and below that their technology wouldn't accurately record it because it was too pronounced, too strong, too exaggerated, almost to the point where it would amplify and increase itself on both ends of the spectrum. There's nobody who has said how that would be possible unless you were speaking into a microphone and amplifying it, and modulating that. But they said obviously it's a vocal pattern. It's coming out of somebody's vocal box and/or lungs, so it's not a machine. It is definitely not a machine. So again, we're looking at, I believe, a defense mechanism that he was responding to being in a situation that he was in fear for his own self, his own circumstance. He was standing in front of me in a box, knowing that I had inflicted that wound in his head, probably thinking I was going to kill it, and doing anything he could to protect himself.
Well, that's curious because it does bring me to another question that I wanted to ask you. And this actually comes from a good friend of mine. It's not my own, but nonetheless, just as inspiring, and we'll get very quickly into the current situation and relationship that you have with this entity, who you've named Freddy. All right. So for those of you who hear me say that name again, that's who I'm referring to. Does Freddy hold anything against you in terms of that event? Obviously being very invasive after you caused, such calamity as it would seem. Has he, I know you mentioned a little bit about this the last time we spoke, but I don't think we went into deep detail with it. But again, for the sake of the question, did he hold anything against you? Was forgiveness something that we could talk about in the way that we know it with this particular entity and what you went through with it?
Well, just to just to, I'd say no, he doesn't. Okay. But I need to explain something.
Mm-hmm.
From that moment on, I had a different feeling about this entity. I don't know why. All of a sudden, it went from terror, where I was terrified of it, to where I was concerned. I was actually feeling it's injured, it's
Mm.
it's dying. I don't want to cause any more problem with it. What can I do to stop the pain? I even thought about. I mean, Gary and I even thought about, well, should we take it and kill it and stop its pain,
Mm-hmm.
because it had a hole in its head, 2 inches,
Sure.
and no longer bleeding, by the way, but still, it's a hole in its head with its brain actually being exposed. And I thought, it's going to die. It can't survive this. So my feelings started to change in sorry, feeling sorry for it. And I started to say openly to Gary, I wish I'd never done that. I wish that would never have happened. And if Susie hadn't have died, that probably wouldn't have happened, because I'm not a violent person.
Right.
But because of what I had witnessed in the woods, I figured, and it wasn't conscious, it was an unconscious act. My mind probably assumed I'm going to be next,
Of course.
from my dog. And so over the next few days, like I said, the body was in my possession for 9.5 days in my home. And during the next few days, after that third day of it reanimating, I would go back out to my garage and open the lid of the garage with a handle of a broom so I didn't have to get close to it, thinking it was going to attack me, but it didn't. And it stopped screaming, and it started making little chirpy, squeaky sounds, kind of like the sounds a dolphin makes, but quiet. It was definitely injured. It was moving slowly, and it started responding to me. And I realized that it knows what I'm saying,
Hmm.
because I was verbally saying, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm sorry this happened. I wish it had never happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was only, and in saying all this, it was cathartic. It was me trying to explain to myself that I could understand some of this because of the passing of my dog. But it started to absorb not only what I was saying, but the thoughts that were in my mind. And it started replaying those thoughts like a video movie into my mind. I could actually see what had happened in the forest because I remembered. I was
Mm-hmm.
there. I witnessed it. And he was replaying that over and over in my mind and watching my reaction to it. And I'd say, why are you doing this? Why are you showing this? I was there. And he'd change the scene to something else. He'd change it to things that happened when I was a kid, when
Hmm.
I was with my parents on vacation. And I could feel the grass and the air, the wind in the trees, where I was just, a child witnessing this, but it was like it was happening right now. I could smell it. I could feel it. I mean, incredible telepathy, putting
Mm-hmm.
these images in my head. So I started realizing that maybe I didn't have to say anything. Maybe I could just think it. And that was true. Whatever I thought, he got. And he would replay little parts of it to me. And both of us started to learn from each other during this time. And I even got to the point where I brought him an abundance of things because I thought maybe he should eat something because he's lost blood, and have some water and he wouldn't eat anything. No food, no grass, no leaves, no dog food, uh, nothing. but he took water from me in a little cup.
Hmm.
I actually handed him the cup, and he took it from my hand and drank the water, all of it, and then he looked at me and he threw the cup toward me and just sat there calmly watching me to see how I would react to this. So I knew he was intelligent. I knew that he was seeing everything that was going on and absorbing everything. So during this time, again, to answer your question, I would say over and over, I'm so sorry that this happened. I never wanted to hurt you. I was only trying to stop what was going on. Do you understand? Do you comprehend me saying that I didn't mean to hurt you? And it would go right over his head. It would be
Hmm.
like he didn't see it at all, like he couldn't even absorb those words. Where a second later, I could bring up something else and he would absorb it totally. So, for whatever reason, he never was able to tell me he understood that I was sorry, that I hurt him, or that I didn't mean to try to kill him when I did. But it was the forced effort at the time, but an unconscious effort.
Well, it
But
was a defense mechanism for you as well. I mean, you just had a loved one, for all intents and purposes, have that happen right in front of you. I mean, in a protective sense, that's where we go.
absolutely,
Survival
absolutely.
instinct.
And just not to force this so far forward, but I want people to understand I was able during 9.5 days before he left to actually learn rudimentary communication with
Hmm.
him. I was actually able to say, I can speak to you, you can speak to me. And he did. He showed me images of what I can only imagine was his world or his building of his life in very small amounts. I was able to create a communication pathway, and he allowed it. He let me. When he first started communicating, it was like a fire hose being, you know, squirted into my mind with all this jumble of information. I actually had to say, slow down. I
Flooding it.
can't comprehend, slow down. And he did. He slowed down. So he understood. We started to understand each other. On the 10th day, when I went back to my house and found the vans in front of my house, and they were destroying everything and taking a lot of my evidence. Luckily, we had mailed a lot of it away out of the country. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any left. But on that day, they had taken the body, they had taken the freezer. But on the floor of my garage, right on the floor of the garage, there were little wet looking footprints that didn't go to the door, didn't go to the window, but went like he walked right through the wall. And I mean, it was clear that they went to the wall and stopped. So I had hoped that he got away. I had that nobody had seized his body. Well, on that next few days, I decided I had to leave town. I had to get out of town. And because they were ransacking my friends and my house, my parents' house, my elderly parents. And I just decided I'm going to leave. I'm going to go somewhere else and
Yes.
try to take it away from this area. So I borrowed a car, took some money that some people gave me, and literally drove to Vancouver, Canada alone and decided to just stay there and try. I would communicate best I could with some other friends who maybe could tell me what was going on. But I actually was homeless in Canada for 11 months before, I decided to come back. And there were reasons why I was gone. And again, people were invading my privacy. People were tearing my life apart.
Hmm.
Uh, they had destroyed my career. They had eliminated all of my credentials, all of
Mhm.
my graduation certificates, and accumulation of a lifetime for me, literally 15 years of going to college, they destroyed. Now, you start asking yourself a question. Who has the ability
Mhm.
to do that? Okay? Not just some random person, but it's got to be some organized group. And who had been running off the road, who had been threatening my life and destroying all these records. Again, who has the ability to do this? And my, well, let's just say I have decided at that point of my life that government types were the only ones that could have that ability to do that.
Certainly. Certainly.
And I'm one of those kind of people, unfortunately, that the harder you push on me, the, the more stronger I get in deciding that I'm going to push back. And I decided at one point, because they had destroyed my credentials, I decided, well, I'd talk to a law firm and ask them some questions about what if somebody destroyed your background and they took away your passport, for instance, your US passport, which I had had for years since I was 16. And they said, well, the law firm said, that's no problem. We can get that back. It shouldn't be a problem. So
Mhm.
give us a few days. I gave them the information, but I didn't tell them why this all started. I didn't say it's because of an alien,
Right.
contact. I just said it's gone. They said no problem. This was a law firm in Los Angeles who I knew the brother of one of them because I went to school in Los Angeles at UCLA. So, long story short, he calls me back in a couple of days and he says, I got to ask you a question, Jonathan. Did you kill somebody? And I said, no, jokingly, absolutely no. And he says, every door I've tried to open to get to people who can get information to us to rebuild your background is slamming that door, saying that you have created a federal offense. You are a federal entity in their system.
Hmm.
You are now being looked at as almost a terrorist.
Mhm.
And this is a lawyer on my side saying, I don't know what you did, but this is really much more serious. And I said, okay, well, let's do whatever we can do. Anyway, they worked on it for a couple of weeks. Again, all the doors being slammed. Finally, one of the young partners says, I have an idea, a last ditch effort. He said, let's take and tell the government that we're going to publish this letter in every major newspaper in the United States
Mhm.
saying that you lost your credentials because they know of an extraterrestrial contact that you made and they don't want to give it back. They don't want to deal with us. 2 days later, I had my credentials as far as my passport.
Sometimes you got to play hardball, and you know what? You lucked
That's
out in that sense because a lot of times
and
they push
and
back.
ever since then, I've learned this is the only way I've been able to survive most of this is
Mhm.
to realize what's going on and then somehow design a better way to negotiate keeping my life.
Okay.
Look, I've been shot several times. I've been shot 3 times, once in the head, and I feel for President Trump, once in the shoulder that went through my shoulder. They've either tried to kill me or they've tried to make me believe that I shouldn't be talking about any of this. And this has been going on for 28 years. Um, I'm sorry to say there are 14 people who are now dead because they helped me, because they literally gave their life to help me survive, to be able to tell my story and be on this journey. And I carry that with me every second of every day. That's unfortunately my legacy of this. But it is serious. This is one of those things that I want to tell people. This isn't a joke. This isn't a some people say it's a hoax. It's not. I have physical evidence. I have people who will testify before Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's over right now. There's over 100 people over the years that I've gathered who have had evidence that my case is true. They've even had people try to scare them and try to force them not to talk or be involved with Jonathan Reed. And again, why would that be? Why would that be if it wasn't some kind of importance? Now, early on, I would have given it away. I would have given this whole thing happily away to somebody who knew how to deal with this much better than me. But for some reason, I'm the one who has had to keep this secret open to the public and let them know that we're not alone, and we're also not the highest, on the food chain. We're
Mm-hmm.
quite low on the food chain. These entities are probably a million years advanced from where we are. I have some indication that some of these entities are us in the future.
Well, the curious thing too that I'm, thinking here as I listen to you, retell this story, a couple questions come to mind. The first is, I wanted to ask you what made you different than an individual like, Phil Schneider, and you may have just answered that within, how you're restructuring your life and, playing different cards to keep yourself alive and so forth. If there's more detail to that, certainly share that with us. But I do have a couple more questions that I'll wait and hear what you have to say about this before I follow up on those.
Well, one thing I want to say, Michael, is people like you who have given me the time and your patience and your kindness to listen to me are the ones that have kept this story going. If not, there are a lot of other people out there like me who have had contact,
Mm-hmm.
who have been driven to take their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand this because during the 11 months while I was homeless, toward the end of that, I was in that same ball game. I was sitting in a basement, a burned out basement, with a gun in one hand and a phone number in my other that somebody had given me right before I left Seattle. And I thought it through. I thought, well, I can shoot myself anytime, but I probably should call this phone number first, because somebody said, Jonathan, you're going to come to the point where you're going to need some help. You're going to need somebody to help you. And I know you don't trust anybody now, but eventually you're going to need some help. And I didn't believe them at the time, but they gave me this paper with a phone number on it. And I went to a public phone and I dialed the number, and a person answered the phone. And this is what they said: Jonathan, how can we help you?
Mm.
And I hung up the phone and walked away, because I figured these are the bad guys.
Sure.
They know where I am. And I'd been living in the Stanley Park in the forest, for almost 11 months. But then I went back and I dialed it again hours later, and I said, how do you know who I am? And they said, we've been waiting for you to call us. We know who you are. We know what you're dealing with, and we will help you. We'll prove to you that we will help you any way you want. If you need a place to live, a hotel room, if you need medicine, if you need a doctor, whatever. I said, okay, I want some money right now. I want proof to me. I want $200 in an envelope under this bench tomorrow at this time. And they said, well, we will work with you. We will work with you. I didn't believe them. I hung up and I staked out that bench, that park bench, for almost a full day from a long ways away, watching, waiting for somebody to deliver an envelope. I never saw anything. And I finally went down and sat on that bench and realized that there was an envelope taped underneath the bench with $200 in it. And a note that said, whatever you need, we will help you, whatever you need. And so some time went by and I called him again and I said, okay, I'd lost about 80 pounds because I wasn't eating properly. And I said, I need some food. I need a place to stay. And they said, name it wherever you want. And I just happened to name a hotel that was right, a little hotel. And I said, okay, this hotel, what do I need to do? And they said, we will put it in your name and you will have a place to stay, or we'll put it in anybody else's name, whatever. And that's what I did. I didn't use my name. I used another name. And they did it. They provided me shelter. And there was a guy in the room when I got to the room that said, I just want to talk to you. I just want to let you know that I'm on your side. I'm not going to hurt you. We're only here to help you. And of course, I didn't believe them for a long time until after a lot of days went by and I had eaten properly and showered and cleaned up. And then I started to listen to them and they said, we're here to help you understand what has happened and why this is important. That you may want to write this down. You may want to write a journal about what's happened to you to give you some kind of ability to put things into perspective so that you can understand. And that made perfect sense to me because that's what I used to tell my patients. I used to say, make a chronicle, make a journal about your kids, about your activities, so that you can see it in black and white. So that made sense to me, and that's what I did. And that journal actually became my book called Link, the Extraterrestrial Odyssey. And it was written by Robert Wraith, who was a freelance writer, and myself. We took about 1,500 pages of my journal and condensed it down to where it could make sense to people. And basically, we chronicled the first 9 days of when I met this creature and when it left my house and I left the country and went to Canada. But
well, yeah, go ahead.
I just need to say, Robert Wraith died a few years ago. A little bit suspiciously, but he's no longer available. We were in the midst of writing another book about the last 28 years, and I will eventually finish that. But it's been difficult without him. It's been difficult when people die because of what I consider them helping me. And this has gone on for a long time. This has included my parents. They harassed my parents, my elderly parents, so much that they died. And I'm angry about that.
Yeah.
I'm angry for all of these tragedies that I don't feel were a necessity. And I'm not proud of myself because I had to somewhat become a monster at times to where I had to deal with some of this up front. And I had to push back. And I had to prove to some of these people that I'm not just going to lay down. I'm not going to stop talking about what happened to me and why I believe it's important. Michael, coming back on your show, I said I wanted to talk about some of the new things that have happened in the last 28 years.
Yes.
And one of them, I recently posted something on my Facebook page that says, we're about to be experienced or delivered something that people need to be aware of. There's something in ufology and this whole genre that's called a false flag situation. And that's where there would be some kind of theatrics designed to make us believe that we're being invaded by alien presence, by an alien race. It's been known for a long time by the insiders that this could happen, that this
Yes.
was probably going to be happening. Well, I've had information told to me by Freddy, by the entity that I've kept in contact with for 28 years. For whatever reason, he has taken me on as his personal project. Maybe I've become his pet, but for whatever reason, he comes to me and to several other people that I've known, that I've
Mm-hmm.
witnessed. If people know me and get to know me and my story, Freddie has a tendency to want to go visit some of those people from time to time.
Well, I
So
think I know where we're going here.
it's a reality that this happens. And people say, well, where are those people? Well, some of them don't want to come forward, and I don't blame them a bit. Because if you had the government after you all the time and you have children at home or whatever, I don't want you to become involved. But nevertheless, people, everyday people who just have met me briefly, Freddie decides he wants to go visit them. And Michael, I think you know what I mean.
I absolutely do, Dr. Reed. And, I'm going to share this with our audience. It's not something that I've mentioned outside of an allusion to in another interview, which you can find, but it's not on my channel. It was for a different show altogether. But that being said, I had an experience that I simply cannot wrap my head around. And this happened 2 weeks after I interviewed Dr. Reed the last time, with the warning that, or maybe just the heads up that, Freddie may come and visit. And he has done this with other interviewers before. And of course, as this is being told to me, I take it to heart, and yet take it with a grain of salt, because, why me? You know what I mean? Maybe somebody else, sure, but why me? Okay, so again, about 2 weeks out from the interview, I come home at night, after I'm done with my responsibilities. Rich Giordano of GoofOn and we play mini golf in virtual reality with our Oculuses. So this was a normal evening, and I think I played 2 or 3 games with him. And as it so happened, my Oculus died. It only holds a charge for so long. So naturally, I take it off of my head, I put it on my shelf, and I turn around, and with my physical eye overlapped with something in my mind's eye, which again is hard to describe, but this is what it was. In the chair I'm sitting in now was an extraterrestrial entity, and it looked like a gray, but it had more of a human characteristic to it overall. And after I thought about this, I tried not to impose the photographs that I've seen with Dr. Reed's case, but I can't get away from the idea that there was a lot of similarity. Now, even maybe more significantly, to the left of this entity, which is on the side of me, were 3 other entities that were suspended in the air about maybe 2 feet off the ground, that were, and believe me, this is really difficult for me to describe, because even conceptually, I don't really understand it or have not come across it. They were ribbons of light. And the best way I could describe this is that, the ribbon, their bodies were about this thick, those ribbons. So, we're looking at about 7 inches or so, maybe 8. And they were comprised of light, and they were just sitting there floating next to this entity. Now, this all happens in an instant, mind you. Okay. As I'm kind of taken aback when I turn around and I see this, I immediately realize that we've been having a deep philosophical conversation about spirituality to whatever degree. And now the conversation was over. And within that realization, poof, they completely disappeared in front of my eyes. Now, I am somebody who's been in the field for a very long time. Like many of you, I've had paranormal experiences. I've gone into dreams, astral projected. I've done a lot of different things that would be considered anomalous and unexplainable, and been through those experiences with my own interpretation. I stood there for a good 10 minutes with my mouth open, wondering what in God's name I just experienced. So after gathering myself for a little while, I decided that I would kind of man up and call Rich, who I would normally speak to anyway. And I decided to share this with him with some hesitation and trepidation, because generally I have a handle on what I've seen. And this time I didn't. And one of the questions he had asked me was, did you feel threatened? And I said, no. They, honest to God, felt like friends. Like there was some connection. Maybe there was a family connection in there somewhere. It felt very warming and welcoming to be in the presence of these beings. Now, again, I could define the one sitting in my chair, but the ones on the left made no sense to me. Maybe they were there to support energetically. I don't know. I'm just sitting in the world of conjecture with that. But that being said, immediately when this occurred, I remembered what Dr. Reed had said to me. And of course, I'm like, oh, no, come on now. Maybe, no, it can't be that. Maybe it's something else. But I could not shake it that there was some correlation. And of course, before we get on the show today, I had waited to, see Dr. Reed face to face to ask him and share this experiment. Ask him if this was something related to his experiences and what he had mentioned. And Dr. Reed, what was your answer to me on that?
Absolutely. What you've described is exactly how Freddy goes to initiate a contact with someone who I've trusted, someone who I have a friendship or developed a meaningful relationship with, which you and I have, Michael.
That's
and
right.
The bands of light, and I haven't told you this, that you may have thought were other entities, may be something different, because how he transitions in and out of our reality is through changing. He's literally traveling by dimension. He's shifting dimension between our reality and another dimension. And that's how they warp in and out of our reality. He can do it initially without you seeing him. You might smell him first, but you won't see him. But you may see an image or a little bit of a flash of what looks like a mirage in the room, and then he'll materialize. Then he will physically materialize in front of you, and he'll sit and watch you. He'll interact with you. He may even try to talk to you a little bit. He can make you paralyzed so that you can't physically move your body, so that I believe that's so that we don't hurt ourselves, and trying to escape that reality. I've learned a lot over, like I said, 28 years, and seen him interact with me in circumstances that are bizarre. I mean, I've been in the bathroom doing what we do and have him materialize in front of me, in a closed room where he's 2 feet in front of my face. They're curious. They're extremely curious. He is. He's playful. He will do things that you wouldn't imagine, like, being that he defended himself by eliminating my dog. I've been in the circumstances where there's been other dogs where he's actually played with them, physically touching them, like petting them, and also paralyzing them so that they couldn't hurt themselves. the only thing they could do was basically whimper and make a very quiet bark sound.
Well,
But
if that's his nature, and what happened with your dog was not an intentional thing. Again, it was a reactionary thing. I mean, there may be something very philanthropic or altruistic, empathic about Freddy that we just didn't
well,
realize.
I believe that as much as I've learned from him, I believe he is also learning from me. I believe that he's seeing that our lives are very disoriented, very uh, sporadic, that we are probably a very dangerous being in their light because we do idiotic, stupid things. I mean, we kill each other for, nothing.
Well, has he
And
ever given you any indication as to what we look like through their eyes?
yes, yes,
Okay.
they are very afraid of us. We
Okay.
are we are not rational. We are not methodical. We are way down the line as far as intellectually being able to handle all of this. I'm a perfect example of that. It's taken me years to be able to accept what he's told me and what he's shared with me, and to understand barely what he's tried to portray in his own life to me. He's a worker. He was like a worker bee. He was in the forest, in the mountains, doing a geological study of something to do with the area. Um, that's what his life was designed to do.
Which had
Uh,
nothing to do with you, by the way, right? This was just a
right,
happen chance meeting. Okay.
right, exactly. It was just circumstances that I was even able to see him. If my dog probably came upon him, startled him, maybe knocking an artifact, a piece of technology off of his arm where he could have escaped, and I would have never seen him. He would have been out of the area, completely removed before I even walked upon the area. But my dog interrupted that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe that it was only a defensive move, that it wasn't an aggression. He's not aggressive. He's never hurt me. He certainly could have. He has the strength of, 10 men compared to me. He's touched my body. He's touched my hands and my face. He's interacted with me enough where if he wanted to destroy me, he could have many, many times.
Well, you
But
mentioned
yet he,
strength, which, we usually equate to something physical or biological, and maybe on the mental plane or emotional plane, this is more theoretical or intangible for us. But we do understand that there's a validity to that. Um, did he ever give you any indication as to how he was able to either play possum or come back from something that was much more lethal in terms of that situation that you both found yourselves in, to the point where, he's still alive today and considerably thriving?
okay, in regard to your question, no, he has never mentioned that. He has never drawn any any link or association to him surviving, other than he has indicated that he appreciates the kindness that I have shown to him.
Hmm.
That's much, much different than other humans that he has had the ability to interact with.
Can only imagine.
They understand that they can't really trust the human uh, initiation
Mm-hmm.
because we are too violent. We're immediately violent. And I have to put myself in that same boat. Yes, there were circumstances, but nevertheless, I didn't sit down and try to talk to him. I was violent. And I have to agree with him. I think human beings are very violent. Now, regarding his regeneration and him playing possum, since this happened 28 years ago, I've had the ability to talk to all kinds of people, uh, people who work with animals in their whole life, who study this kind of thing. And first of all, we have to realize that there are penguins that survive at 50 degrees below zero half of their life,
Hmm.
you know, that they're
Mm-hmm.
happy. They're completely able to survive and reproduce and everything else. So him being in the freezer may have been a condition that actually helped his survival. It may have slowed down the process of him degenerating and giving him some ability to regenerate. Now, am I speculating? Yes, I'm speculating. But there are other animals that possess this same ability that live on this planet. Um, we also know that if humans have a brain injury that severs half of their rationality and motor abilities, our brain has an amazing ability to reconnect itself and connect to a different part of our brain to make that happen, to bring back
Mm-hmm.
those motor functions that normally wouldn't be in that part of the brain. So we have a very self uh, sustaining system, and it's not unlikely that that's what happened with him. Uh, so our brains are divided in half, and many creatures have two hemispheres
Mm-hmm.
within their brain. But we know now that they are connected in ways that we didn't before realize, that they're actually a regenerative properties to it. And this is what had to have happened. He went into probably a coma state
Mm-hmm.
that slowed everything down to where I felt he was dead. I felt there was no breathing. I could not see any movement to his body other than he was bleeding. And at that time, I felt he was gone. His life force was gone. But nevertheless, it wasn't. It was slowed down to a minimum. And in years since, he has reiterated that this is the process of life, is that the preservation of life that now, again, a lot of people don't know this, but I've asked him, do you believe in God? And I've tried to explain what that is. And he's literally said, we believe in one creator for all life,
Mm.
all universes, plural. And that this creator is the one who holds the key of them beginning this life, holding this life, and ending this life. And he sees it as doorways, only stepping through different doorways. So the end of their life is a good thing. It's just a transition.
It's really curious you say that because it reminds me of when my uncle passed away. Unfortunately, of a heart attack. He lived alone. We didn't find him for a few days, what have you. But my mother went to a clairvoyant, sometime after this, within her own convictions, wanted to make sure that he was okay, but had known, she knew that she had many conversations with him while he was here about what life after death might be like. Now, he wasn't a very religious man, but he would never say that he didn't believe in God because his logic was, well, I don't want to be wrong when I get out that way. I said, all right, fair enough. So he crosses over and, clairvoyant gets in touch with him. And so my mother asks him, how was it? In plain terms. And he said, just like you said, it was like walking through a doorway. So you used similar verbiage to what I've heard before in parallel experiences, and I just found that interesting.
Well, Michael, we could spend a whole nother show on near death experiences, which I've also experienced myself
Oh
just
wow.
because of some personal medical issues.
Mm-hmm.
But also the fact that I've been able to, or should I say, I've been fortunate to have been shown what's on the other side of a lot of the things that we as humans only have speculated. Um, I have used a piece of technology, what I call the link artifact,
Yes. Yes.
and I was given the ability from the owners of this to use it and transition from this reality where you and I live to another reality that only can be, in my mind, what we've determined where our souls go when we transition.
Hmm.
And this has happened several times with me, but in one instance, I was able to actually see the process from where we go as a human being, where the body dies, the body is dead, and the life energy, the life force within us, what I call the soul, is resurrected and put into a different state of being,
Mm-hmm.
almost like an organic bubble of plasma, and entered into a sea of entities, of other entities. I mean, millions of them, where I've looked out across a landscape and seen these millions of bubbles connecting to each other and moving around each other, and then coming back in front of me and becoming the man that I knew
Hmm.
in this reality. And that's a physical form. That's not a it's not an illusion, it's not a hologram. It was a physical form, just like I am today, just like you are. And that we can make those transitions. We can actually visit those realities under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this was not my design. I didn't choose to take this journey. I was given this opportunity to take my dying friend and deliver him to this place, and shown the process in the continual process of our lives transitioning. I'm not a religious man. I have never been. I'm half Jewish and half Christian. But all of the knowledge that I have, that I've learned throughout my life, came into a physical process, a physical nature, to where I could see it, I could witness it, I could feel it, I could understand. And I was told what this was happening, what this process was, and that there are some entities who are in charge of this process.
Mm-hmm.
This is their life. This is their job. This is
Mm-hmm.
their whole being, is to make this process happen. And I asked the question, I said, who are you? Are you God? And they said, oh, no, 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 no. The Creator is in charge. We are only the caretakers. We are only the ones who make this transition happen and interact when something is awry. But we have been given this privilege to be part of this, to be part of life, and that we preserve all life in the universes, all of them, no matter how small or how big. We are here to represent the presence of the Creator.
That is really interesting to me, and to have any sort of insight into what other life forms may perceive in respect to reality is an absolute nugget of gold, towards any goal that we have in terms of understanding that. Would it be safe to say, at a very elementary level, okay, very rudimentary in terms of this thought, that perhaps, in a sense, at its core, reality and life itself is a projection of consciousness, or an application of the manifestation within, how do I explain it, a very experiential
Michael,
sense.
Michael,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Consciousness, the term, is overwhelmingly inaccurate because it takes on so much more than that word projects. We need to understand consciousness
Hmm.
as a state of being in our mind. Okay, we need to understand that, like in meditation, there's a process of getting in and out of it that stabilizes other issues of our life force that we don't currently understand.
Okay.
Life is not a projection where it's an illusion like the Matrix, say. Use that as a reference, the movie The Matrix. It's a constantly evolving scene that is being generated in front of us and behind us, and that we can really only look backward. We as humans can't really look forward much. We can't really see the future, but we can be told the future by people who have been there, people who are part of that future.
Yes.
These entities are part of that future. They are part of they are in some ways our descendants. And in some ways they're literally keeping us alive for a reason within their own self. Their own being is derived from lineage from us. There are things in our life, in our brain, in our understanding that they need because in the process, something in the process of the evolution of their life forms, some of it has been bred out or left behind. And they know that they need that to survive it. And we need it also to survive currently.
It's synergistic.
But us humans tend to fight against their process of helping us evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And through the ability to create a consciousness that is more adaptable, more willing to accept the transition of dimensional shifting, we will evolve. We will become part of that evolution. But we have to get to the point where we don't fight it. We fight among ourselves, which they don't like. They say we are a warring race, that we need to learn to use our minds in different ways other than destructive ways.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with them on that.
We can absorb more mentally, which will get us much more farther down the road as far as them accepting us and letting us take those evolutionary steps. We have been fortified over the millenniums to get to the point where we are today. Our minds have been enriched. We have been given the ability to reason and discern more and more problems as we become more intelligent. But that intelligence has a two-edged sword. Mankind has a tendency to be destructive to itself in trying to get a leg up and trying to gather more strength. We need to think about that mentally, not physically. In other words, we don't need to achieve more land. We need to achieve more inner sanctum productivity, the ability to care for more people and gather more people intellectually to be part of our strength, part of our coalescence, so that we can take that evolutionary steps as they're offered to us, that the consciousness will be broadened and we will open some of those spectrums that have only been closed to us. I mean, we can reach them. We can reach both the other side. We talk about those who have gone before us. We can reach them. We can get to them. Freddy's ability to interact with us is the same. It's the same kind of thing. but he's doing it, some with technology and some with the ability that they've learned, that they've gathered over the years. I mean, if you consciously realize that they're a million years in front of us, and they have the ability to bend time and space in moments versus light years,
Mm-hmm.
that they have the ability to travel without spaceships in, from one planet to the other in a matter of seconds, just using their mind and consciousness and the way they've been able to balance and traverse dimension. They're using dimension like we use the stairway. We walk up the stairs to another, another level in our house or our workspace. They're doing it by changing dimension.
That's how
And
I've
they can
always understood it too. Yes.
and they just slip in and out of dimension. That's why sometimes we can see them and sometimes they disappear right in front of our eyes. And I'm talking not only about the entities, but also some of their, shall we say, surveillance, some of the UFOs that we see that are going at so fast and making right turns, and then all of a sudden they're gone. Well, they're changing dimension.
There's
They're
something within the right angle about that
right.
too. That
And
yeah.
Freddy has discerned and explained to me where he came from, that he is literally a test tube entity, that he was born and raised in a shall we say a city
Mm.
on Earth that's under our ocean, that's beneath our ocean. That's where he was raised. He was raised to be able to transition and accept our atmosphere and live and work vitally in our atmosphere with our air, breathing our air, being able to walk and traverse our gravity. That's why he was created, was to work here, was to develop information and gather information about our planet, about the geology of our planet and its evolution. This is critical to their way of not only life, but their way of being. They're trying to stabilize the earth as much as they can. Now, it's far beyond the total uh, ability to change everything that happens on our earth. Some of it is absolutely natural and way beyond their ability,
Mm-hmm.
but they are monitoring it, and we need to take solace in what they're saying and what they're doing, because I'm not saying that we are the the worst offenders, but the earth itself is going through a transition, and we need to be prepared for that transition. Part of that transition is getting us off of this earth and reestablishing our essence in other places. Um, there are catastrophes that happen, and we can go back in time through not only anthropology but archaeology and see the fact that there were floods that happened throughout our existence in the past multiple times, not
Mm-hmm.
just once, probably 6 or 7 times,
That's
where it
right.
literally wiped out all of humanity. And then it started up again, and we were helped again and again. Now, whether you believe the way back story of Zachariah Sitchin in the Anunnaki and the Sumerians, it's up to you. But there is a lot of proof that in fact did happen, um, and that some of that has come forward even to our day today. That they are still helping us. They're still allowing our lives to continue in a lot of ways that in some circumstances they probably shouldn't, because we haven't taken the big steps to change the way of our thinking, the way of our own demise, shall I say.
And, perhaps this at this point is really up to the individual. And maybe we look at something like disclosure, where people think, oh, somebody's going to come out on a stage, say, hey, this is what it is, and everybody accepts it for what is expressed. Maybe it's something much more personal, wherein, in numbers, as we continue to understand this on, one individual going into a next, we raise that consciousness collectively, wherein eventually you get a certain percentage of people. And I've heard this in many different factions about consciousness, how it plays out, and may even roll into, this collective idea where you get, again, certain percentage people who are at a certain level vibrationally, they automatically bring those who are around them up in a peripheral sense. And again, there are many examples of this in terms of societies, cultures, and so forth on a scientific level that we may measure or call something differently, but it's the exact same thing, just obviously displayed in a different way. Now, Jonathan, we're having a fantastic conversation. We have about 4 minutes left for this evening. I know. And, there are reasons that I cut it off at a certain point, and a lot of it has to do with audience retention. And, this is through years of doing this type of thing. I have an idea of where the cutoff is. But that being said, you have a book. Where can people find it?
The book is available at Amazon. And right now it's an ebook only. It's very cheap, very, very cheap. In fact, Amazon makes most of the money off of the book.
Of course.
Called Link, an Extraterrestrial Odyssey. It's available at Amazon, Kindle.com. And I advise people to read it and understand that was the beginning of this journey for me.
Mm.
And since then, there has been so much more that has happened. And I will do my best to tell you everything that's happened. I want to leave you with one thing after saying thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention, Michael. Thank you for giving me this platform. But I want to leave you with the fact that we are not alone. They are here. They are all here around us. There are thousands of entities that walk among us every day. We don't see them sometimes, or we see them as something else. They have the ability to project something within us that we see them as another person. And I've been told it, I've been shown it, I know it's true, but we have been semi-colonized already. So for somebody saying, oh, well, we need disclosure, well, I am disclosure. I'm
Exactly.
probably the best evidence you're ever going to find. And I will do my best to tell everyone what I know. And it's not complete. I don't have all the answers. But in 28 years, I've gathered a lot of information. And to tell you, whether it be here on this forum or any other forum, people need to keep listening. People need to keep gathering, not only from me, but from other people who have had experience that maybe they can't completely understand. They can't completely explain. But we all need to think of this as a mosaic, which is going to be the name of my next book, because all of these, circumstances, all of these experiences gather up when you spread it out and look at the big picture of what this is all about. That's the importance of it, not each one of us and as an individual. I'm not important. What's important is the big picture. Mm-hmm. And the big picture is about life, continuing life, that life needs to continue, and that we are part of that process. We're part of that mechanism, and that living a good life is important. It really is much more important than people have realized in the past. We're in a generation of young people who don't see necessarily that importance, but we need to cultivate that within them. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about life itself, the development of positive energy between all of us, that we can reach out and touch each other verbally and physically and say, let me help you. no matter how little that is, I'm here to help you. And that's what we need to do. And I thank everybody, and I hope to come back, Michael, and we'll continue this process.
Without question, we will absolutely have you back, Dr. Reed. You couldn't have said it better. And I really appreciate, the gratitude that you have for your experience, especially going through as much as you have. It's unparalleled, to say the least. And I don't think many people would have gone the same direction. But there are some of us who are anointed in a sense within certain experiences, and perhaps in the background there is some agreement that you came into this life with to undertake this very significant message, but had to go through the experience yourself. Either way, I really thank you for your expression, your bravery, the courage it takes to continue to push forward, and of course have this relationship continue to forge with Freddy and that group of energy, I'll put it that way, that again, most people don't have that opportunity in doing. There's something very special about what you're doing. There's something very special about your case. And this information, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, will never go away. Thank you so much for being on the show this evening. Yeah, I'm gonna put you in the back there in the green room. Hang on for a minute. I'll be back.
Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. My goodness. In leading these interviews, there are times that I am left a bit spellbound. And this is in the best of ways. My curiosity certainly goes in many different directions. And, the more you get into things, the more of a possibility there is that you may be involved in one way or another. Now, I think my experience is unique. And maybe I've had other people tell me in the past, getting to know them and their experiences, well, something might happen. My grandmother might visit you. Okay, sure. I can't really say that any of that has come to fruition, but what I experienced after talking to Dr. Reed is unprecedented and sits at the top in my archives of experiences. And for that reason, I won't speak on it too much unless something else progresses. But that being said, for those who are curious, I'll always be expressive. As long as people keep an open mind, we have a forum to have these type of discussions. In no way, shape, or form is this the last time I'll be working with Dr. Reed. I mean, there are things that we're going to get into, hopefully supporting his case more in many different ways. I mean, there are so many angles that we can approach this with because of how much his case encompasses. And for that, I am eternally grateful to have Jonathan as a friend and a colleague in this. And of course, the gratitude that I hold being able to work with him in any capacity. Because again, you guys know me, a lot of you do. And you understand that sometimes I tread the fence back and forth of whether, we should kind of go one way with a belief or, maybe something else is at the helm. I have to tell you outright, I believe Dr. Jonathan Reed's case. I do. And I believe it in full in that sense. Yeah, I'm putting myself out there for that. I don't care because I have more than reason to believe this. And anybody who wants to have that discussion privately, get in touch with me. I'll outline it for you. And again, come with an open mind because there's a good chance that if you had any questions that kept you on the opposite side of the fence by the end of the conversation, you might be thinking differently. But that being said, folks, I want to thank you very much for being with us this evening. Another fantastic interview and experience here with Dr. Jonathan Reed. I will certainly let you know what's coming up next. Intergalactic Wrangler. Thank you so much for the $5 super sticker I saw you put in there. Obviously, during these interviews, as you know, I don't interrupt. I will shout you out at the end. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. Every dollar that goes into the show goes back into the show, and that means that maybe I'm going somewhere else to have better internet. Okay. Need money to do that. But again, I appreciate everything you guys give me in terms of support and look forward to working with you again on another interview, which will be coming up probably next week. I know I'm on a show on Tuesday night. It's out of Georgia for the life of me. Can't remember the name. Once I do, I'll put that in the description just for those of you who are curious and want to attend. Obviously, you can reach out to me and I'll let you know personally as well. But that being said, thank you very much. Go down into the links below and check out the interview with Dr. Reed and Dr. J. There's two of them. And then check out the one that Dr. Reed, Dr. J and myself did about a month ago. And then come back and rewatch this one. It'll all coalesce over time and solidify in terms of a bigger picture of a story that Jonathan is literally sitting in the middle of and now taking us along for the ride. Because guess what? That was always the plan. Whether we knew it or not, whether he knew it or not, it seems like this was always the plan. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks for being here. And we will see you next time. You're on Dark Hour Paranormal. Ciao.